Welcome to another episode of the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast. Today is going to be a little bit different. I have had quite a few folks that have reached out and asked for my story in the Hunt Test game and how I kind of got into this whole thing. And I was asked by Barton to be on his podcast, The Lab, where he kind of wanted to know my story, and we talked through all that. So I asked him for permission to share that recording with you so that folks that maybe don't know much about me, Chris Rud, the host, that I could share this episode so you guys could get to know me a little bit better. There won't be a ton of content like this. I mean, my goal really is to keep bringing more and more information about the Hunt Test game, and we definitely talk about a lot of that in this. So it's a long one. All right. It's like 2 hours. So if you make it that long, congratulations and thank you. But anyway, this is episode 8 of the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast. I hope you guys really enjoy it. Welcome to the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast, your place for truckside chats and insights into the retriever game. Whether you're just getting started or you're a seasoned handler, this podcast is another resource for tips, tricks, and insights from both the amateurs and professional trainers' perspectives. Each week, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of retriever training, sharing stories of success, overcoming challenges, and forging stronger bonds with our dogs. This is the Hunt Test Hobo Podcast. I'm Chris Rud, your host, fellow retriever enthusiast, and student of the game. Let's dive in.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the lab. This is going to be a super fun one. I'm very excited. Honestly excited just to get to know Chris Rud, whom I've never met in person and who was gracious enough to hop on with me on a Thursday night and chat dog training, and who recently I've entered a fun partnership with through the Hunt Test Guide and Cornerstone Gun Dog Academy. So lots to talk about there. I'm excited to learn a lot and hopefully excited for you guys who are listening to learn a lot as well. Chris, what's up, man?
Man, what's up? This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I've had some cool guests on here, but I was talking to our buddy Clark Kennington earlier, and he was very excited that we were both going to hop on here. Yeah. So you have been given this new nickname. Maybe it's not new, but the Hunt Test Hobo. First thing I got to ask, Chris, how in the world did you get that nickname?
Well, I'm an amateur and I don't have a lot of money and I can't afford hotels. So when I go to the grand and pre-grand training, I deck my truck out, my little half-ton truck with bed in the back, and I sleep in it. And a lot of times I'm up in northern Illinois, so when I got to go to like the spring grand or something like in Natchez or way down south, like I just drive until I can't stop it, until I can't drive anymore, and I just pull back in some trucks, some rest area, and I got these little chains that I flip onto my topper so people can't get in, and sometimes I sleep with my 870 across my chest, No, not really, but no, yeah, seriously, I sleep in the back of my truck, and I love cooking and camping. Like, it's one of my favorite things to do at Hunt Test. So Tyler and Clark, one day we were sitting at an SRS and they said, "You're the Hunt Test Hobo." And I was like, I got to Google what that means, like what hobo means, but I think I like it. And then that was it. And I created a little Instagram account, and I've just been like posting little things. I had like 5 followers up until a couple weeks ago, but
I love that.
I just went for it,
Well, it sounds like you earned it honestly, which is good. Speaking of cooking, another question from Clark. I sound like the guy that's like our Patreon guests, subscribers. He asked me a very important question to ask you, and that's who makes the best mac and cheese?
Oh, Jay does.
Oh, okay.
Don't tell my wife, but I stayed at Clark's house a couple weeks ago, and one of his clients, Jay, made this mac and cheese. I don't even know what he put in it, because I went to the grocery store with him, and he was just grabbing stuff. And the only thing I remember is he grabbed some Velveeta cheese, and I'm not a big fan of Velveeta cheese, but it worked, man. It was. I told Jay, I said, this is the best mac and cheese I've ever eaten, and I've eaten a ton of mac and cheese. If you ask my mom, like, that's like what I survived on as a kid, was just all different types of mac and cheese. So Jay needs
you're adequate to give.
Jay, if you're listening, you need to post this recipe and give it to me because you told me you were going to give it to me and I haven't received it yet.
The pressure's on. I love it. I made some mac and cheese and smoked some ribs the other night on Father's Day.
Yep.
My wife had a little bit of a stomach bug, so she was kind of getting over it at that point, and she ate a few bites, and it was funny. The next day she woke up and I asked if she wanted any leftovers, and she said just some of the mac and cheese. It was like a smoked Gouda mac and cheese.
Oh yeah.
Yep. And I was like, well, the bad news is that's the only thing that all of it was eaten, and that always tends to be the case. There's plenty of ribs, plenty of beans and slaw, but mac and cheese is gone.
Yeah, the other reason for the hobo is like I don't have any good smokers. I don't got an offset or anything like that, but I got this little tiny portable Pit Boss, and I do everything on it. Like pre-grand training, I do cinnamon rolls. We did beef ribs at the last SRS, and I just love that thing. And now Clark has one, so we run two of these little Pit Bosses that we can't even put a full rack of ribs in, and we're cutting them up. But we eat good when we go to Hunt Test.
I've noticed that, and that tends to, it seems to be kind of a new thing for Clark. Maybe you were the inspiration, but I noticed like a year into our friendship, he started sending me. I love to cook. I cook on a flat top a lot. I love to cook on a Traeger. Love smoking stuff. He started asking me a few questions. He asked me actually about Brussels sprouts. That was a big one for him.
Yeah.
And so we started talking, and then he started. He used to only ever send pictures or videos of setups, or dogs doing something. And then it became pictures of bottles of bourbon. Look what I found, which I'm a collector. So that was cool.
Yeah.
And now here's what we're cooking this morning at the Grand. And I'm like, man, that looks good. What is that? It's like some casserole dish or some Boston butt or something on a smoker. So I think you're probably the inspiration for some of that.
Man, as an amateur, like I got one or two dogs at the most at a test. And when you're sitting there all day with your friends, I mean, it's great. But when most of your friends are pros, they're going to the line back and forth. And so you're sitting there for you have spurts of conversation, then 7 minutes of nothing. And so I just finally started to I didn't know how to cook before I started running Hunt Test, and I just got bored and I just started Googling stuff. And I got two Blackstones that fit in my drawer system and roll out. And I made a little sink area. I have a spice drawer that I'm pretty proud of. So it runs almost all the way to my, it's like 3/4 of the length of my truck bed. So I can put everything in there. And I was actually, I film for a living, and I was on a video shoot. We had a bunch of models and we were grilling steaks on this crazy, it's called a gacho grill. It's like this Brazilian grill. It was a super expensive install of this amazing landscape that our client did. And I'm like, dude, I got some holy cow. Let me go get this holy cow. I'm a big meat church guy. So my entire spice rack is almost all it's got the essentials like some Lawry's and stuff, but it's almost all, meat church stuff.
Well, he's a good friend. He's on the short list for the podcast too. We just got to find a time that works. Oh yeah, dude, Matt. I took him to shoot his first duck this year.
Oh my goodness, man! I pretty much only know how to cook or how to smoke stuff because I watch their stuff.
He shares stuff in a way that you're like, oh, I can definitely do that.
Yeah.
He's not like, oh, this is going to be really hard for you. He's like, hey, this is super simple. You can do this. And one of the most humble and awesome dudes I know. That's awesome. You're one of the things that I've talked to a couple of the guys at Cornerstone about this, that when they started mentioning you and they were having conversations with you. So I looked you up and I was like, all right, we have a similar personality trait. And that's that if you and I think get into anything, it's not like a little bit, there's no dipping a toe in or hey, I'm just going to get shin deep in this. It's like, oh no, I found out I like this. I'm going to the high dive. I'm jumping all the way in, going all the way to the bottom and figuring it all out, which is awesome. And I think we'll get into a lot of that with Hunt Tests in this conversation, but good to know that it's cooking too. And good to know that you have something to smoke with and a Blackstone. I think if you have those two things, you can do almost anything on the road. Yep.
And then I got one of those I can't remember it's not propane, it's like a butane or something. It's like the one that you can take up into the mountains because coffee's an essential. So I just make coffee all day just with a little pour over. Just go for it.
I love that. Did you see the new I got my wife one for Mother's Day, the new Yeti French press?
No, I haven't seen that, no.
Yeah, they came out with a portable Yeti French press that you can use, and then it just obviously keeps everything warm throughout the day. She loves it. She's a coffee fanatic. I'm an energy drink guy. So,
Oh yeah, I've never had an energy drink in my life, but
true millennial fashion. I would love to love coffee. I tell people maybe when I grow up one day, but when I was in high school, I worked in a coffee shop, and I didn't like it in high school, and the smell was on me all the time. So I would leave work, and everybody's like, "Oh, you smell like coffee," and for some reason, it just made it to where I can't get past it. So I've gone through spurts where I try. I'm like, "All right, this is the month. I'm 35 now. I'm going to give it a go," and then no, never sticks.
I didn't start drinking coffee until right after college because I was a youth pastor, and I was told that you have to be able to sit and drink coffee with people to have like real relationships. So I choked it down at one wedding. I remember my wife was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I gotta have better relationships."
This is how fellowship takes place.
Exactly.
Let's dive down that trail for just a second. Then I want to get into dog training specific questions, but youth pastor stuff. How did you get into that, and how long did you do that?
Well, I was a pretty decent wrestler. Wrestled in college, won state, but when I was like a freshman in high school, there was another wrestler that was like the guy you looked up to, right? And he invited me to a church lock-in one night, and I went, and that was it. You know, I was like, holy cow! Like I just said, holy cow, isn't that funny about a testimonial? But I was like, this is it. Like I finally, it all clicked with me, it all connected, and then I just felt like that was my calling. I did that for I think like 6 or 7 years, and at one point the ministry was like the calling to do vocational ministry was just, it wasn't there anymore, and I felt like God released me to go do business, and I started a film company, and that was kind of it. We're super active. We go to a non-denominational church plant, and my wife leads worship, but so I went to Wheaton College and got a Christian education degree, and it was a really formative part of my life.
Yeah. So I don't know if we've ever shared it on the podcast, but I went to Criswell College, a lot like Wheaton, especially at that point in time, because it was like pretty largely reformed. At least a lot of the professors were, and got my degree there and did student ministry and family discipleship ministry for about, like 10, 11 years, and started Southern Oak Kennels in the middle of that, and was approached by Josh and Keith toward the end of that about starting Cornerstone. And very similar, like just with our family dynamic and where we were and where the business was, I felt the same thing, which I don't know how you felt about that. And I don't want to get into a super deep spiritual conversation, but it was weird because I don't think I necessarily had a category for like a temporary call to do something in ministry. I'd always heard like, oh, well, you're called for life. Yeah. And then one of my mentors was like, well, where'd that come from in scripture? And I was like, that's a great question. I don't know. I know my giftings. I know what I'm equipped to do, but I felt called to do this. And now I feel led to run a business and serve my family. And so, yeah, it was very simple. Like that's really the start of Southern Oak Kennels. And same thing. We're super active in our church. My wife leads worship at our church, and now we have a business. And yeah.
It was interesting. It was harder on my wife because she was a pastor's kid, and like she said in 8th grade, God told her she was going to marry a pastor. And, we went down that, the whole road. And then all of a sudden, I didn't feel like that was what, God had for me. I love teaching. Like I still fill in, and I still, not as much in the church we're at now, but before, like when we in between pastors, like I was one of 3 that was preaching every Sunday. I love teaching, but what I am not good at is counseling. I'm like a tough athlete. Like, hey man, just get up and keep going. And I learned really quickly that doesn't work, and that's not what God, built me for. So that was probably where I realized, like, you're more of a teacher, which I think, honestly, my mom and my dad, my mom's was a school teacher. My dad is a pilot for American, but he teaches, his job is a check airman, where he's making sure that all the pilots are doing what they're doing, and he teaches. So I've grown up as, with teachers all around me, and that's what I really love about the dog game is, I'm teaching an animal, but now more than before, like I'm able to teach a lot of the people in our club, and it's been like really fun doing all the podcast stuff, because I feel like God put me here. Well, maybe not. I mean, God put me here, but I feel like what I'm really passionate about is learning the retriever game. Like I love every part about it, like trying to understand it. I if somebody says something and I think it's crazy, I want to dig in and find out, is it really crazy or is there something in there? And
Sure.
and I think like more recently it's been like my real passion is keep learning, but can I bring other people along that learning journey with me? So that's why I love the podcast. And I'm sure that there's some things that a lot of people haven't heard that, I've had to figure out over time. There's so much stuff out there to learn, but it's all kind of piecemealed. And I feel like I've been down the YouTube trail so deep, but I love it. I love being a student of the retriever game.
Yeah, man, what a great way to phrase that. And that's real. I didn't know a lot of that about your story. And we'll have to have maybe a second conversation about a lot of that, which is, I mean, my wife is the daughter of a pastor, uncles and granddad are pastors.
Same.
Felt her whole life like, yeah, you're destined to marry a guy that's going to be a pastor. And truthfully, when you leave that, it's almost like an identity crisis, and walking through, and my wife in general was not at all a dog person, just didn't really care much for dogs. So didn't grow up with them. And then I was like, well, we're going to own a Labrador retriever kennel. and we're going to use the skills of communication and teaching that I've been using in the ministry to teach people to train their own dogs. And that's a super similar journey, with the caveat that I never got into the test games at all, and have lived vicariously through lots of friends who got really into it. My excuse per se is when the time was right for me to start doing that is when we started having little children.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became like duck season ends. I've been out pushing my kennel and my dogs and getting marketing content. And the last thing I want to do is say, hey babe, I'm going to travel a bunch more, for the spring. So I kind of put that to the side, and have had I'm sure you've heard in my other conversations, have had a great amount of respect for people who do play the games. I think it's awesome. Maybe in the future, my kids are getting older, when I have more time, sounds like a lot of fun. I think about that pretty often. Like, hey, in the future, that'd be a good gig. Go hang out with you guys and cook on some flat tops and
man,
run some
that's
tests.
what it's about.
Yeah. So tell me about your dog training journey. When did it start? What was your sort of first experience? How did you learn how to train retrievers?
Well, I was an avid deer hunter in high school. I'm from a little town called Sandwich, Illinois, like the sandwich you eat. And I have a lot of relatives in Sandwich that we all just deer hunted. Like I grew up, we did archery every Sunday morning before church, and there'd be like 25 of us that would go out, and we had my back of my uncle's house and shoot 3D targets. We had 15 of them. I'll never forget. We'd put $1 in a coffee cup or a coffee can to buy more stuff. And I would sit there at the magazine and look at it. So all that to say is, like, I grew up hunting a ton, but when I went to college and went into the ministry, I went into basically the city, and that was kind of it, right? I didn't do much of it, but my grandfather, I think he's 92 right now, still goes duck hunting with us. He's starting to lose it a little bit, to where I gotta like load his gun and remind him that his gun's loaded, and like don't let him touch it. But man, when he sees a duck, he's like, oh, there's a mallard. Oh, there's a golden eye. Like he can't remember what happened 5 seconds ago, but he can tell what those ducks are, and he can still shoot them. But anyway, I knew he was getting older, and this was probably, he was 85 or so, 86. And we had some family get together, and I said, Grandpa, when is duck season open? And he told me, and I said, when it opens, take me, So we went out, and I shot my first wood duck. Man, I smacked that thing. It's probably the best shot I'll ever have. This thing was cruising. And I dropped it in some reeds in this cow, this like little this cow pond, man, and it was just so filled with silt. And my grandfather's out there at 85 or 86 in waders up to his chest in muck and mud. And I'm like, if he falls, he's going to die. Like, and he's been hunting out there for as long as I think he started when he was in high school hunting this like little cow pond. I'm like, eventually he's going to fall in. This is going to the end of it. So I was like, I got to get a dog. And I really wanted a lab. I wanted a yellow lab because that's kind of what I grew up with. But my wife said no. So she had me looking at poodles. She had me looking at everything that didn't shed. And there was a time where I almost ended up with a poodle. And a lot of people don't know that, which I'm not saying that you couldn't go hunting with a poodle, but there's no way you're really going to have success in the grand with a poodle.
We wouldn't be having this conversation.
No, we would not be if I got a poodle.
Yeah.
But anyway, because she was like, that's the first hunting dog. But it took me forever to convince her to let me get a dog. And I ended up getting a lab out of a grand dog. The dog's name was Maximus. And he was probably the worst possible dog for a first-time dog trainer. Very hard-headed, didn't want to work with you, loved to retrieve more than he probably needed to retrieve. And I just really struggled. I had bought Dawkins' book. And honestly, I was pretty educated because I saw a Super Retriever Series video on YouTube, and when I saw a dog run a blind, like a real blind where that thing like stopped and saluted you, I was like, holy cow, you can get a dog to do that. I was like, I got to get one. So I'd never seen a dog ever pick up a duck in real life. Everything that I had seen was just on YouTube, the Great Outdoor Games and all that. And I was like, I got to figure out how to do this. So that was my goal, is to teach a dog to handle. Like, that was my ultimate goal. And I got to a point where I couldn't do it. Like, I ended up realizing that I was nagging him and not giving enough of a correction to be like, okay, dude, you're doing this. Now, I never would have learned that, but I ended up meeting Dan Erkey at Green Acres. He had, I don't know if you guys all YouTube him, he has videos from pointer video, and then he has this puppy video that he did with some folks. And what I saw him doing, I was like, man, like, that's what I need. I need somebody like that. And I thought he lived in Texas. And eventually I finally Googled his name, and I realized, like, oh my gosh, he's only an hour and a half from me. So I got on the phone, and I went down there, and that was kind of it. Like, I fell in love with it. Took me a little bit to get connected to him. I started with one of his other trainers that wasn't there very long, and she helped me a lot. She did a great job, but like, when he started to work with me was when I really started to figure it out. He's a really interesting character because he's really into the whole British game. He's done a lot of he's imported some British labs. He has a whole British wing shooting. He imported a shooting captain named Keith, and they run British shoots. And I love to go to those because I get all dressed up, and I sit there with my dogs, and we retrieve birds, and my dogs have the greatest time in the world.
The picker-upper.
Man, I love it. Like, that's so much fun. So anyway, Dan has, he kind of combines a lot of the Rex Carr, Mike Lardy, as you guys worded in your last podcast, compulsion. But because he's worked and trained on a lot of the British methods, a lot of our puppy development is done in a very, I don't know if it's similar to what British puppy stuff is, but like, a lot of the stuff I do is not compulsion until they're much, much older in life. So he's the one that taught me a lot. He's interesting because he owns a hunting club, and so he's training pointers. I mean, he's probably training 9 to 15 different breeds at a time. So he's seen it all, from Vishalas and all these different personalities that make it that I think have made him, probably in my opinion, the best basics trainer that there is out there, because he's so scientific about everything that he does. And if it wasn't for him, like, there's no way I would be sitting here right now, because he's an amazing teacher.
So did you go to him with your Maximus dog, your yellow dog that was a little too much?
Yep. And it was great because he only lived to 14 months old. I'll tell that story in a little bit, but I got through force fetch with him, learned force to the pile. He was the dog I learned with, like what not to do and what to do. And I jumped in, like you said, like I had hunted one season. Like I went on like 6 hunts and then bought a dog.
Yep.
And I went on a guided hunt and a snow goose hunt, and I didn't know anything. And was in a pit, and they put the dog, like the guy put the dog in a dog hide, like sitting on top, and there was snow goose decoys between us. And I swung on a bird, and he was sleeping, and that was that. So that was the hardest thing that I ever went through, was losing him. You know, he wasn't a fun dog to train or anything, but it doesn't matter. You know, that was like the hardest thing I had ever went through. Like I took off some time off work, and I just had to mourn, because it was an accident. I didn't understand about that type of level of safety with a dog, because, you know, I was trusting this guide, and he left. He wasn't even there when it happened. So I learned a lot, and I grew up a lot that day. But I had already decided, like, I was doing this dog stuff.
Right.
So I had put on order winter, which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
I was put on a list to by winter, and my friend who hunted a little bit, like, was eaten up with it too. And so he bought a dog out of Mason, and it was out of a Dude female, which, if you know anything about American pedigrees from the Hunt Test game, Dude had 15 grand passes and 2 crown championships, and Mason had 16 grand passes and was a crown champion. And so I went from like a very hard dog to train to the easiest dog in the world. Cause like when that happened with Maximus, I just asked him, I said, "Hey man, I need a dog." And so he let me train his dog Finley. And then by that point I had kind of learned like a lot of the stuff, the basics, right? Like there's tons of nuances that I had to kind of pick up. And so I was training Finley, and my sister was like, "Hey, I want a dog." So we went and found this nice chocolate. So I trained her at the same time. And then like 4 months later, I got Winter. So I went for it. So I had basically trained 4 dogs in like 6.5 months. In a 6.5 month period, I had gotten all these dogs and trained them. And Maximus never got any titles. I ran him in one started test to learn that that was like, what is this Hunt Test game?
Yeah.
You know, what is this thing? And I was like, I don't need any ribbons. But my friend said, "Hey, you should just go to it. It's only like 30 minutes from your house." And I went and I watched the dogs, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is fun."
Yeah.
And then I was hooked on like not just training dogs for fun. I was hooked on like, I'm going to do this for competition.
I love that, man. That's a tough deal with Maximus, and unfortunately, I think that's probably every season I see posts about stuff like that happening, and you know, shame on guides who don't set up better and explain to clients better. And obviously, you live and learn, but yeah, it's that stuff is tough. I'm glad you stuck with it. I'm glad you kept going and got the bug. And it's also a crazy parallel that you got into it a little bit later in life. I mean, I don't think I went on a duck hunt until I was 22, 23 years old. And similar thing, a friend from church invited me, and I was a punk rock kid, dude. I had skinny jeans and, you know, my lips pierced. And he was like, "You want to go on a duck hunt?" And I was like, "Sure." You know, so
Yeah,
whatever, man. And I went out, and I had a Springer Spaniel at home, and a guy brought a dog that was from a British lab kennel here in Mississippi. And no knock on the kennel, the dog had just not been trained well. And the dog was breaking and wouldn't recall. And we only shot a few ducks. I hadn't shot anything all day, and this one duck comes over super high, and I was like, "I'm going to shoot it." And the sky busted a ring neck. And I watched it. I can see right now exactly where it fell. And I was like, that was cool. Like I'm doing that again, you know. And dog got it and finally brought it back. And I had a Springer Spaniel at home that just retrieved frisbees and sticks, but was from a field trial lineage that I just happened to have this dog. And the next time the guy invited me, he was like, you're welcome to come with us. And I was like, can I bring my dog? And I told her to wait. I'd never introduced her to gunfire, so that was super risky.
Yeah.
She was so eaten up with retrieving, she didn't care. And we went to I think I'm past the statute of limitations on this, but we went to a catfish pond. I had no clue about duck hunting. I'm in borrowed waders. I'm using a borrowed shotgun. And my buddy's father-in-law owns some catfish ponds, and he said, man, I've got a real problem with these hooded mergansers eating my minnows. I need you guys to shoot them. And I'm not going to say how many we shot, but
it was
the limit was 2 per person, and we had a pile of hooded mergansers, and we did not have a pile of people. Yeah. And my Springer Spaniel went and picked up every one of them just right back, delivered a hand just like a Frisbee. I had no idea what I was doing at all. And that was, I drove home and I was like, oh, I'm going to train a dog to duck hunt. Like that's the deal. It's amazing how that bug will hit you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're all in. So let's talk a little bit about winter and the transition from I've run a started test. This is pretty neat to, I mean, that's a very accomplished puppy. So let's, if you don't mind, give us her puppyhood, arriving to your place, and what that journey looked like.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with finding the litter, because I think this is like something that if you want to get into the hunt test game, this isn't a bad strategy to follow. As I just got on entry, not Entry Express, HRC entry, I think is what you get the grand results. And I'd finally figured out what the grand was. And I was like, well, whatever dog has the most passes, I'm going to get a dog out of that dog. So I went, and that first dog was Mason. I'm like, well, we already got one of those. So then I went down the list to the next dog, and the dog that had 8 passes at the time was a dog named Scratch, who's Winter's dad. And out of Grady, really solid dog. Steve Eric owns him, and who's one of the nicest human beings on the whole planet. And I Googled Steve Eric on Facebook, and I found him. But then at the same time, I found this other litter that was with Scratch, and it was a 6-time grand dog at the time, female, named Piper, owned by Jeremy Legg. And so I texted Jeremy like that moment. I said, if you ever do a repeat breeding, I want on the list. And then he called and asked me a million questions. And I was like, well, I've never done anything but run one started test. So that was, honestly, like, I'm surprised he sold me the dog, but he sold me the dog. And to be honest, like, so I had been training at that point, Finley, who is super talented. I put a HRCH title on her at 14 months old because she was a COVID dog. Winter I got during COVID too, but like, I was so scared here in Illinois. Like, I didn't know what was going to happen. So I had trained Finley up to, she was running season level blinds on land. And I was like, well, I can't do swim by. I don't have a swim by pond. Now I figured out how to do swim by. But before that, I didn't know how to do swim by yet. So I asked Dan to train it. And I was honestly worried that I was going to be locked in my house. So I literally, like, the day that the governor was going to shut down Illinois, I got in my truck and just drove down to Dan and gave her the dog. Cause I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to go to parks. Like, I didn't know what was going to happen at the time. And I knew this dog was like special. So I gave Dan the dog for like 2 months before I realized that COVID's not going to ruin the world. And I went back and picked her up, and I finished that, and we put her CH on her. And I had another dog, Lulu, who actually is sitting right next to me. It's my sister's dog. And I put on the chocolate. It's 43 pounds of chocolate lightning, man. She just goes. Yeah. And she comes into the story about Winter here, so it's good to set it up a little bit. So then I put a CH title on her the following spring. And honestly, Winter wasn't anything special. She was a nice dog. She can mark really well. Like, she's just doesn't need to be trained a lot on marking. Like, I still had to teach her cheating singles and all that. But like, she's one of those dogs that, like, if she sees the bird, she pretty much is going to go find it. Mm-hmm. But Dan's program has a ton of handling drills for puppies. So I invested a ton of time with football casting, placeboard casting, all that puppies work to where I pretty much had her handling by 8 months old. Basic T stuff, but she could stop and we have a couple of different ways that we teach dogs to stop on the whistle that, they really like to stop on the whistle. Like it's a reward for them. We'll get into that in some of the coursework, but we really so anyway, so Winter could handle good and she could mark good, but she was crazy. Like I'll never forget the first time I gave her a freshly killed duck, and she gator rolled that sucker. I mean, she bit that thing and just started rolling, and I was like, "Oh boy!" Like I was like, "What do I do, Dad?" And he's like, "Don't worry about it. Like just don't give her any more birds." So we
push pause.
Yeah, so she didn't get hardly any birds for a long time, and it's interesting because I was like, you guys were talking about the force fetch thing in your last episode, and I was like, yes, 100%. We have bred that out of there. There's I don't, people might say that it isn't. No, force fetch has fixed so many of those mouthing issues that we can cover it up really easily. But it's interesting because we bred her, and Fang, her son is like he has no mouthing problems. So she didn't throw that. So I was pretty happy about that, but I was prepared.
Sure. I mean, look, that's even you even see that in the British world. Some, you hear of lines, and I know of lines that you're like, oh, they do more than just roll dummies in their mouth. They're chompers, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have a method to fix it. It's just a fun conversation to say, hey, has our training covered up some genetic flaws, maybe, or faults?
100%.
Let's call it that way. Oh, yeah, I think so. I think Bob admitted so. That was a fun podcast with him.
Yeah. No, and honestly, to me, it doesn't matter because to us, like that's the standard. Like you're going to go through that process, and so as long as you can go through it and there's not a problem, like she has no issues.
Sure.
It took a week to get rid of it, but anyway, we're getting up. So she wasn't really that talented, right? But I just stuck to it, man, and I just kept training and training and training with her, and I was getting ready for my first grand, and I was going to run Finley and I was going to run Lulu. And I just had put a CH title on Winter, barely. Like she gave me 2 cast refusals, and I gave her the Hail Mary over looking for an angle back. like, okay, we're not ready for the grand. I was like, over, and she just like barely took any angle and went right to the bird. I was like, okay, well, you survived that after 2 cast refusals. So I had pretty much made up my mind that I'm like, okay, she's not ready to run the grand. Like her handling is not quite there. But all of a sudden, Lulu, who was honestly, I thought she was my strongest dog, just couldn't mark anymore. Just had no depth perception anymore. She would run straight at that bird, didn't matter how far it was, and just overrun it every time. And I was like, there's no way. This happened for like a month. And I was like, there's no way this dog's passing the grand. And I was like, well, I already paid my entry fee. And at this time, I didn't know that they refunded your grand entry fee. If I would have known that, I wouldn't have been sitting here. And I was like, well, I've already paid it. I'll put Winter in. And Winter went out there, and the first series was this really hard series. I remember Chris Aiken was on a podcast. He's like, man, he said, I can't say it. I can't make fun of Southern accents. I'm a Yankee, but I almost did there, and I'll stop. But
Chris is thick.
Yeah, but Chris was like, that was like the hardest water test he had seen in a long time, and Winter smacked it and lined the blind. And I was like, that was pretty cool. My friend's dog Finley, I was running her, and she had to handle it because she ran last dog of the night, and I didn't know that you could kind of protest if a dog didn't see the bird at the end of the day, and she didn't see the big bird, and that was that. And anyway, I would go to the second series, and like Clark was in front of us, and I walked up, and I didn't know Clark at the time, but he was talking to Dan, and they're like, nobody's seeing this long bird. No dog has seen the long bird, and they're just pointing and shooting them and getting them out there. And I was like, Winter can't point and shoot. This ain't going to happen. And we went up there, man, and she saw the bird. She's like one of 7 dogs in our flight to see the bird, but that, dog that didn't know anything was just like, there it is. And it was a big go bird, 180 yards. And she went up there, and she like skied her way up the last like 30 yards. Like she got in some drag back, man, and just went loop, 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 back and forth, back and forth. And I was like, they're going to say, put her on the bird here, like any second. And then she just kept getting closer and closer and closer and then picked up the bird. And I was like, yes. And she picked up the 2 outside birds really good, and then she lined the blind, and I was like, holy cow, what are we doing
Holy
here?
cow. You're 2 series in and you haven't blown your whistle.
I haven't done anything yet. And, well, I did. I did blow my whistle because on the diversion bird, I couldn't believe that she had picked up the triple. And I was like, how many times have I done a diversion bird with her? So like they launched that thing. I'm like, tweet. I think I blew that whistle all the way till she was next to me because I was so scared. I was like, oh my gosh, And anyway, we get through that series and we go to this little duck pond, and that was when I had to do another. That was the Hail Mary over again. She gave me 1 cast refusal. Then she took another cast, made progress to the blind. Then she stopped. I tried to give her a little bit more. She gave me a cast refusal, and I gave her the Hail Mary over. And she took enough angle and went right to the bird who was sitting on top of a little tree, which I was like, when I saw that setup, I was like, she's never seen this before. And she must have got a snootful, man. And she just picked it out of the tree and came back. I was like, but I knew I was in trouble. So I was standing there like waiting to be put on honor. I was like, I'm either in or out. And I remember looking over, my friend Doreen was like giving me the it's not good look, and the gallery's looking at you like you're hosed. And they talked about it a little bit, and they said, you're off lead, you're on once. And I went, okay. And we went to the fort, and at this point, I forgot to say this. Dan told me after she had passed the second series, he's like, you need a little reality check here. She's not going to make it through. Like, don't get your hopes up. I was like, I know, but man, she's doing really good.
This is great because this is providing such a normal human element to hearing someone say, well, we'll finish the story in a minute and then we'll talk about it. Cause it's so nice to hear this side of it of like all the emotions. Oh yeah, we're going to steamroll this thing. Oh no, we're out. I think we can when maybe we probably shouldn't, all that stuff.
Oh man. So I was like, and at the same time, her brother, her litter mate, was running in a different flight, the flight in front of us, and he's still going too. So you had 2 dogs that were both 17 months old, like getting through the Grand. It was great, and we were losing dogs, and it was crazy. But we got to the 4th series, and it was a big land setup, and the big memory bird on the right had this little ditch in front of it, and every dog was getting in. Not every dog, but a lot of the dogs were getting into this little ditch and stopping 20 yards short and not pushing up this angle back hill. And my friend Tyler, my best friend Tyler, was actually throwing those birds at this point. He was out by that point, and he's throwing those birds. And she picked up the left 2 birds really good. And I sent her for that long bird, and they weren't giving the dogs any time on this big right bird. And she got to that ditch and stopped and spun around one time. And I was like, no. And she spun around and just ran up the hill and picked up the bird. I was like,
holy
cow.
Oh
my gosh. And now I'm like, now I got to run this blind. And I'm looking at this blind the whole time. Like, I'm like, this looks really easy. Like we might get through this. And I line her up, and I think I 2 whistled it, and she smacked it. She looked like she was like nothing like she looked in the water test. And so when we made it through, and I remember like my phone going bzz, 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 because my friend Tyler, who's in the hides, like, I can't believe she picked up the bird. Oh my gosh. I'm like, I know. And we had to have like a celebration like at the end of it, because he's sitting in this throwing birds for the next 3 hours before we could celebrate. But it was a pretty cool moment. And then because I never thought she would ever run or get this far, for this Grand, we had never done a single thing of upland training, like ever.
Cram it in.
So it was in St. Louis, and Dan only lived like, I don't know how far. Probably, I think he lived like 3 hours away. So his wife drove out with 140 chuckers from the club.
Dang.
And because we needed some for Dan's dogs. And
what an advantage, though.
Dude, there's no way I was getting through if it wasn't for Cindy driving all those birds out there. And we shot 75 birds over her that night. And then in the morning, we woke up at 2 a.m. and went to this business park on I don't know what day it was, before anybody was there, because we found a bunch of lights in the parking lot, and we were flushing chuckers without shooting them. We did another 25 that morning.
Cram it in,
dude. And she goes out there, man, and she flushes that bird and sits her butt down, and we get the grand old flyaway, and she looks at me like, why didn't they kill it? and brought her in, and that was that. That was her first pass. Like, never would have thought that she would have passed. And her brother Granger, I think, went out in the blind in the 4 series, like
Close.
pointed out he was close. He almost did it. And so then I was like, I never had any plans of running a spring grand, because up here in Illinois, it's, by the time that they run the grand in late April, we have snow on the ground most of the time, like on and off. It's not like heavy or nothing, but
the water's still cold.
Oh, the water's cold, man. So, and I'm like broke. Okay, I got no money. This is where the hobo came in. So, like, somebody said, you need to figure out who the youngest grand dog is. And I was like, okay. So I emailed the UKC, and they said it was a dog named Tide, and I think she was like 2 years and like a month and a half or 2 months or something. And I did the math, and I was like, well, if I get all my points and she passes, she'll beat it by a couple months or a month or something. And I had to like really think about it. I was like, I'm not a record chaser. Like, this wasn't any intention of doing this with this dog. I just wanted a dog that I could, play this whole game with.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to my wife about it. And she's like, well, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I was like, okay, I guess. So I like spent $300 and decked out my truck with some drawers and everything. And that's how the whole hobo thing came up, because I was watching YouTube video after YouTube video of all these overland guys trying to figure out how I could survive for a week and a half in the back of a truck.
Save all that money in hotels and
Yep. And I went the entire grand until the last day after she ended up passing. I won't go through that whole grand, but she ended up passing, and I didn't eat a single meal out the entire time until after that, because I had $20 left in my wallet. I took like $300 in cash. I was like, this is all I can spend. And so that's what I made it through the whole trip with. Well, I mean, I used credit card to fill up for gas, but that was all
Where
I had.
was that spring grand?
That was in Natchez.
Down here. Yeah.
And so that's when I met Clark. And if you listen to the podcast, you can hear the funny story how we met. But
yes, it's a great story. He asked me to ask about that, but we're too far in the weeds now. That's great. Man, youngest ever. For those that don't know, Winter wound up being the youngest ever Grand Hunt Retriever champion. Still is, right? So still holds that title. And did you see? I'd love to know your thoughts. That HRC released the kind of average age of titles the other day, a few weeks ago. I saw a few people share it. That was pretty interesting. I thought that was. I mean, for those listening, passing the grand at 17 months is an anomaly. That's not a normal thing. Definitely achievable, obviously, and as you just heard, achievable from a guy that didn't. It's not like you came in with 20 years of experience and said, "Watch this," But for the most part, I mean, I don't even remember what those ages were, but they were way older than I expected.
I think the grand is 5 years. I think is what that was. The average age is 5 years. But I think people ask me like all the time, like, why do you think she did it, or what was different? And I think it was a lot of the handling drills. Like, even though she struggled with handling, like that's a pretty big separation, a grand blind compared to a finish level blind. I did a ton of blind work with her, and I had a lot of time at that point because it was COVID, and I was working from home, and I train her 3 times a day. She just wanted to do it, so I could. I mean, she was the perfect dog for it. A dog that could mark better than I could train. But I knew Dan has a very thorough transition process, and I put her through that, and that what I think that was the key differentiators, that is his program for transition.
Yeah,
and
her ability to run the blinds.
Yep, and
being a natural marker.
Yeah, and like I talked about this with another friend a couple days ago. I think dogs that go through the transition work of cheating marks, there's 2 types. There's types that realize that you're like making them go straight, and then there's dogs that that want to go straight, and then you kind of just help them along, and then like a couple months later they realize, oh, I have to do it this way, and then their whole mindset changes. Like, they wake up to the cheat in a way. And there was a ton of training I had to do between the first grand and the second grand, because after the first grand, I think she really woke up to cheating. Like she really realized like, oh, I could just run around this because I had just never let her cheat. Like when I threw puppy marks, I made sure it was the flattest thing it could be. When there was a cover cheat, I made sure that it was impossible to fail. So she had such confidence in just going and finding that mark that when she was presented with a cheat coming into that first grand, she just didn't even know what it was. She just, the bird's right there, I'm going to go to it. But I had to drive down to Paducah a couple times, and I would camp there because it was just too cold, and I knew water was going to be the thing that could get her at the grand or her second grand. So I went through and redid all of transition work that second coming into that second grand because I knew that she had woken up because I went and ran her because I needed the points. I went and ran her in like November a couple times after the grand because that grand was in September, the which is super early.
That's really early. Usually it's October, right? Mid-October.
Yeah, so I needed points. So I had to go and run a bunch of weekend tests. And then I went too fast and she got like really loose. And I was like, oh no, I'm rooting my dog for this title. That doesn't matter. And anyway, sorry, I'm going to keep going on. And I know that eventually we're going to have to stop this thing.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the de-cheating process. So for those listening that haven't been through that level of training, what Chris is talking about is, dogs, the easiest way to explain it is they want the path of least resistance, right? They want, some people call it the fastest, but really it's just what's going to cause them the least amount of trouble getting there. And water, heavy cover, a ditch, wooded area, whatever, things like that in their mind is like, hey, that's going to slow me down. That's not the fastest way there. So the natural inclination usually is to run around it. And that's what we mean when we say cheating. So with a blind, it's just a handling issue, right? You're stopping and you're casting. But with a mark, it's a teaching issue because you don't really want to handle on marks and hunt tests, especially the grand. You're not allowed to really handle on marks. It's going to ding you. And so you need to teach the dog, hey, go straight. Don't skirt the big piece of brush. Don't skirt the corner of water, whatever that is. Or if it's entering the water at an angle, get in on the line I send you. Don't run an extra 20 yards down and then get in or square up or whatever. So that's what Chris means by cheating. Without getting like super deep in the woods, in the weeds, no pun intended. And I know we're going to get into a lot of this and already have gotten into a bunch of it with the hunt test guide and the training there. Walk me through your de-cheating process with a dog like Winter, or a dog that, early on figures out, oh, he's making me do this. When they have that wake up moment, whether it's early or late, what's your process?
Yeah, well, I'll just say the reason that we do de-cheating is because eventually the marks are going to get so hard and so long that if the dog isn't trained to go straight, they will inevitably get lost. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason that we de-cheat, whether they're hunting dogs or not, is that the best way to stay on line to a bird and get that bird is to go straight. So that's why we teach it that way.
Yeah, let me interrupt you there because I totally agree. I had a potential client here yesterday, and I was running a double and a blind, and it was off a point. It was the memory bird was very cheaty, and I had a dog. He was going to get in the water, but it wasn't the line I sent him on. I stopped, and the guy asked, why'd you do that? And I was like, well, and it was not a difficult mark. Get out, no cover, just run up the hill, big white dummy right there, easy. And I told him, I said, I want him to take a very straight line there. And his response was, well, that must be like a hunt test thing, right? Like, and for a hunting guy, it doesn't matter, right? And I was like, well, yes and no, right? Like I understand, especially on the way back, you might not care too much. But if you've ever seen dogs run long marks, what Chris just said, man, I mean, if they get in at the wrong angle, they're probably going to get out and try to fix their angle on their own. And they're not good at geometry. Yeah. And they're going to overcorrect the angle, or they're just going to, what you said, get lost. And so while it's not necessarily the end all be all for just the duck hunter, it is cool to have a dog that you've taught take a straight line all the way there. And it is most definitely your best chance to having your dog bring back your ducks that you shot quickly. Yep. And not just absolutely get lost and hunt the whole countryside. So yeah, I totally agree. Coming from a British guy that doesn't do a lot of compulsion training. De-cheating to me is, and in the UK, there's not as much water, and dogs you have a lot of bank runners. So I import a lot of dogs that are highly, highly trained, but they're literally trained to bank run.
Yeah.
And so the de-cheating process here is it's always pretty fun. So anyway, back to how you do it.
Well, I mean, it's pretty traditional Rex car, Lardy, de-cheating. I start where just working on just getting out at the right point. You know, if you throw a bird down the shore, younger dogs, I'll stop them in the water when I see them make that noticeable change towards the shore where the bird obviously isn't. I'll stop them, give them a light nick, more of a communication nick than they just know like, oh, that's not what I'm supposed to do. And then I cast them and repeat it. I repeat a lot of marks. And that's pretty much my method. But the one thing that I do that I don't see a lot of people do is to make sure that they really understand it is, let's say we set up that same down the shore cheating single. I'll let's say you threw the bird and the bird lands 30 yards away. Well, before I throw that, I'll put 3 white bumpers on the shore under the arc of that bird. And then I'll throw an orange bumper. And the dog has to focus on the area, ignore the 3 white bumpers on the shore, and proceed directly to that. And what I find that helps them focus on the area and not just use the gun as a crutch. You'll see that some dogs just almost always end up halfway under the arc on a cheating single. And I think it kind of works like a chair drill, which we don't have time to get into that, but it gives the dog a reference point to say, hey, this is not where you're supposed to be. You're supposed to get out at this point. And we actually teach that with blinds. First, we'll line up 5 bumpers on the shore, decently spaced out enough, but you go and you pick up the long bird first, and you just keep handling them until you get to that long bird, and you work your way down to the short bird. And after time, they'll line the long bird, realizing that they have to stay in the water and choose to do the right thing. That's almost all attrition. So
and that's isn't that called tune-up drill?
Well, yeah, some people call it a tune-up drill. I call it. Everybody has different names for things.
Sure.
I think that's actually a Bill Hillman drill, and he called it the 7 bumper lining drill.
That's right.
So I think that's a really effective. I don't spend a lot of time on that, but I teach it in the yard pretty early. And then once I teach that in the yard, they generally understand that decently well. And you have to be through swim by, obviously. I mean, I'm making assumptions that a dog is through swim by before they moved into this, obviously. Yeah.
Learning to cast and wade water, hang out, look at you, wait for a cast, swim past you. And if you're in here, if you're listening to this and you're like, what in the world is swim by? Or you're like, what's a cheating single? Obviously we're in the weeds of, advanced level retriever training. And I would highly encourage you, here's my sales plug, to check out the Hunt Test Guide. If you're into retriever training and you think, man, I love this, it's a great hobby. Clark, Lyle, Chris, others I can't name yet, have partnered with us at Cornerstone to help create what we think is going to be an amazing resource to help you to where these are just very normal terms for you and you have a full understanding of how to teach your dog how to do these things. Because while they might not be necessary for a hunting companion, although they would be helpful, they will definitely be necessary if you want to achieve high level success in the hunt test world. If you want to break Chris's record,
go for it.
Or if you just want to have at some point a grand dog or a master national dog or a crown champion, you're going to need to know this stuff. So if you're interested in diving into those weeds a little deeper, the access is there. You can certainly learn it. And you're talking about COVID dogs. So like, we're not talking about, hey, Chris learned this stuff in the late 90s and is now sharing it. Like you've attained enough knowledge to have the record you have, which I want to talk about, in the last, 5 years, 5.5 years?
5 or 6 years I've been doing it. But
yeah,
I mean, like you mentioned, like I'm one of those guys that just goes in all out, and I flew model airplanes competitively for a long time. And I actually quit doing that because of dogs, because I love that the dogs could, in a sense, talk back to you instead of just flying aerobatics. And I was on the U.S. World Team, went to France and Spain, got 7th in the world. And what I learned really quickly was you had to have a really good coach. And so I would drive to Ohio, and there's this guy named Billy Werwidge who was, a 3-time world champion. Basically, was kind of the Rex Carr of what I was doing. And Rex Carr is the American the American training process is pretty much all comes from a gentleman named Rex Carr. But he was the Rex Carr of model aviation, and he took me under his wing and taught me a lot. And so when I got into the dog game, I was like, I knew without a shadow of a doubt, I had to find the coach. I knew the coach was the most important part. And what I was really blessed with is that I believe I've found the best basics coach out there. And so he helped me truly understand the fundamentals. And if it wasn't for that, there's no way that, I would be here, because he is the biggest stickler on line manners and obedience, and all these tricks and stuff that are in my course. A lot of them come from him. And that's what I see the most failures at a hunt test for an amateur is you've already lost before you even get to the bucket. That dog is on his own already. And that's the reason I think I was able to really do it. And like I said, it was never an intention. I just wanted to train the dog the best I could. And whenever I felt like that dog was ready, I ran him in the level below that one. So when I ran winter and seasoned, I knew she was ready to run finished. And then when she was ready to run finished, I was like, I don't know what the grand is, but I think she could do it.
I appreciate that comment. That's been said multiple times in multiple venues, but I think it's important for people to hear all the time. If someone comes to you and says, hey, when should I start running my dog in season tests? You already kind of said it, but what's the simple answer there for those folks that are thinking about it?
When you're ready to run finished.
Yeah. And what's the best way, do you think, to go figure out what in the world is a finish test?
There's a lot of YouTube videos out there. You can watch it to see, my daughter and I, she's 10 and she's going to run one of my dogs and started. And we just sat and watched a video, and it gives you a good breakout. There's a bunch of folks that do. There's a family, a husband and wife team in Minnesota that have a lot of great videos about breeding. He's a hunt test judge and a field trial judge, and he's got some great content out there. And he has every level of HRC, NAVDA, Master, Qs, and he walks through it. They're a little long, but you can learn a lot. And then the best thing to do is just to show up at one.
Yeah.
The only thing you got to do is don't wear bright white. Wear something that's earthy tone so you don't distract the dogs, and have a fun time watching. It's amazing what the dogs can do, and it's the best family atmosphere, or it's the best camaraderie, family, whatever word you want to use for it. All my best friends now are running hunt tests, and primarily HRC, because that's what I do the most of.
Yeah. And you show up, I think, for the most part, people want to attract new people to run the sport, right? So you show up and you're like, hey, this is my first time, or this is my 4th time. I don't know what's going on here. You're going to have 20 people that want to help you and show you and answer questions. And I feel that people overlook that, and there's a large emphasis on the negative drama, whether it's hunt test, church, any
human endeavor,
flying aviation, model aviation. There's always an emphasis on the drama when you talk about it. Bob and I touched on a little bit of that recently. And that's one of the reasons that I enjoy doing this podcast, is I try to squelch as much of that as possible and say, hey, there's a lot of bridges here. There's a lot more commonality than we're usually willing to admit. In my experience, almost all the time you show up at hunt tests and people just want to help you out.
Yeah.
They want to see success. Field trials could be a little different because there's one winner, right? And
I think people at hunt tests, when they are at field trials, are more humble because they all got their teeth kicked in.
Yeah, that's accurate. That's a good point too. So
they
tell
may
me
not
about
be
your
as friendly,
career.
but they're humble.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel that. So tell me about your career real quick. So for those that don't know anything about you, Keith mentioned it recently on a Zoom call. like, I know you're not bragging. I'd have to ask you to say any of this, but your pass ratio is insane. Walk us through what that was your first several years. And I want folks that listen to this to hear the story of why you got your first failure, because I think it's really important.
Yeah. So my first weekend failure was, well, I went 52 for 52 in season, finish, master, any sort of hunt test that I ran. Almost.
How many grand passes did that include?
3.
Okay.
It would have been 3 at the time. No, it would have been 2 at the time. It would have just been a Winters 2 because she came into heat the next basically 2 grands. So that kind of stunk, but that's part of having a female.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I went 52 for 52, and I have a young dog named Rex who is probably 10 times more talented than Winter was. Smartest dog I've ever trained, and he was too smart for his own good, and I could tell, I'm not the biggest fan of me running seasoned. I think that it's exactly what everybody should do. Their first couple dogs run, started, then seasoned, and then finished, because it's great for you to learn. I just find that I'm always training for the grand. That's my goal. So I like to wait to run anything until I think my dog is ready to run finished. I do run one started weekend with the dogs, just to see how the dogs do with line manners. I want to make sure like I know what I got and what I need to work on, but then I don't have to deal with running a blind and having the dog give me a fit. Like you can see a lot by what your dog does when they've been sitting in that holding blind and going up there. So anyway, I went straight to finish with Rex, and honestly, I was probably a little ambitious because I wanted to run some derbies with him. And so I wanted to get his finish title quickly. And so I went like 6 finish tests, because if you run started, you need normally you only need like 4 finish passes if you go through the normal process, but you have to have enough to get 100 points. So I think I needed 7 passes with Rex, and on number 6, the day before, I was like, this dog is getting a little too little too amped up when I blow that duck call. I'm sitting on the bucket, and so I had kind of made up my mind. And this is the first time I've ever had a gun violation too. I had kind of made up my mind that like if he moves at all, I'm taking the bird away. Like this dog has an entire career in front of him. This one weekend test does not matter. So I blew that duck call. I shot the first bird, and I looked, and he was a good foot in front of where he was before. So I set the gun down, and I said sit, and I roped him, and I didn't like abuse the dog or anything. I just pulled him up in the lead and said sit. And then I walked off, and little did I know that I never safed the gun, nor did I open the breech. So I was done the rest of the day, but luckily I'd already finished with Winter.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, you would have been unable to run
I would have been
the
done.
rest of your dogs. Yeah.
Yeah, I was done. So Dan was going to have to run Winter, but so that was my only time failing, and I failed twice. I failed the dog, and I failed gun safety.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but that's important. And I think what you said at the end there, the career of the dog is so much more valuable than this past. Yep. And that, if you're out there listening and you're just a duck hunter and you're never going to run a hunt test, just swap the words out, right? The career of this dog is more important than this hunt. It's more important than this retrieve. Like that's such a valuable lesson that I had to learn the hard way. It's like, hey,
yep.
Sure, I could. I mean, you know that feeling. 3 of your buddies are watching, like, well, we could give it a shot,
Yeah.
Or
my
dog broke and crept out, and I could go ahead and just release it with his name, but how far is it going to go next time? Yeah.
And I've honestly, like, I've had, like, all of my good luck is in Winter, and all my bad luck is in all my other dogs. So I only have one dog that I can run right now that I can campaign with, Rex. I was like extremely proud, because once you pass the grand with a young dog once, you're kind of like, was that just a fluke, or can I do it again? And not trying to like prove to anybody else, but I just wanted to know, like, was that a fluke, or like, did I do a good job training the dog?
Mm-hmm.
And Rex ended up passing his first grand at 19 months old, and he would have probably been able to, he was ready at 17 months, the same way Winter was. It's just the dates of when he was born were just different. And I think that plays in a lot of dogs. Winter, just everything lined up for based on her birthday for this to happen. And anyway, the point of the story about what you're talking about is one bird, and I hunt a lot. like as soon as October 15th, 19th, whatever that opening weekend comes, like I'm done training dogs. It's over. And Winter was just bred, so I didn't have her to hunt. And so I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to hunt Rex, And his second hunt, we were on a big old feed in a bean field, and we just landed a group of 20 honkers and smacked them, and we were picking up birds, and you know what happened? And I was staking them out because I knew it was his second hunt, and I was trying to be very diligent about that. And I looked up, and I'm running the hunt, and I look up, and here comes a group of 40. They're coming. And I'm standing in front of the layouts 30 yards, and the dog hide is 50 yards deep, or is 30 yards deep of the layouts. And so I just tell him to kennel, and I'm like, he'll be fine for one. So I get in the hide, and we land those birds, and I call the shot, and he broke. Now this isn't as scary of a story. He breaks, but I stop him. I'm like, oh, sit, and he stops in front of me. So I didn't shoot. But all my buddies just shot to the right of him, and they just buzzed him. All right. He couldn't hear after that. And his hearing slowly did get a little bit better to where I was able to run a blind out to 200 yards. But it slowly regressed to where now he's completely deaf at 2 years old.
Dang.
He has one grand pass, and now my daughter's going to run him and started. Because... I mean, and it's just tough, man. I mean, dogs is heartbreaking, man.
Sure.
And I've done that 1,000 times with Winter, just send her back there, and she sits there, and I think he was confused. I think that he thought, because he ran to me, he didn't run to the birds.
Right.
And it just, but that was it. And so now his career's over. I mean, I really think he could have just kept going, and he'd probably be running SRSs with me right now, but it's just, it's just hard. And a lot of people don't realize, like, I think I've trained 15 dogs now. I buy 2 dogs every year. I train them. And if I don't think that they're as good as Winter was, I sell them to a hunter because I just keep looking. And Rex was the one, man, like he could do it. Like he was ready. And that's that, so I just keep buying dogs and trying, man. I just keep trying. And right now I'm training Clark's dog. So he's like, that dog's a freak, man. I'm excited for him.
That's a lot of pressure too, but it sounds like a really nice pup.
Oh man. And there's no pressure to me, man. I'm like, I want to see how this dog that I bred, I put together the breeding. I mean, I know like Clark really wants a dog, but like I've been dreaming of breeding to Stroker for a long time.
Yeah.
So like to have a puppy and it to be exactly what I want. It got every trait that I was hoping Stroker would give to Winter. And so, like, I'm going to do a repeat, and I'm going to keep one now. The only thing that Winter passed on that sucks is she walks when she poops, man, and that makes picking up in the yard really hard. And Fang's worse. Like he runs while he's doing it. I'm like, dude, what the heck, man? So
listen,
but I've checked the other litters, and they don't do it.
Yeah, but that's such a weird. I've talked about this on several of the podcasts. Like genetically speaking, what passes on? And I've got a little female pup out here named Honey that I'm obsessed with, and she's from my dog Moose, which I bought from Laura. I did a podcast with her. Laura lives in the UK, a highly successful hobbyist trainer in the UK, and I bred Moose to my wife's dog Wella, and Wella does this thing where she walks around the yard looking for, I don't know, things to eat. Like acorns, whatever, and she pops her tongue in her mouth in such a way that it makes that like clicking sound, like a and it's just popping. I can't even do it.
Yeah.
And you hear her do it, and you're like, "What is that?" And she did it as a puppy, and sure enough, 9 weeks old, I let Honey out, and I hear this sound. I look over, and I'm like, "I've never heard another dog do it, and you're doing it." So I texted a few people from previous Wella litters, and they're like, "Oh yeah, my dog does that." And I'm like, "What a weird, like," or just like dogs that spin when they poop, just spin circles, right? Or walk when they poop, or whatever. Those genetic things that pass on are mind blowing to me. I'm like, "Daggum, how did you get?"
It's amazing that will pass. And then I've bought 4 dogs. Well, I trained for a friend a dog out of it was a grand breeding, won the Sire's a crown champion. That dog was awesome. Then I bought 2, thinking, they're gonna be awesome. I'm gonna keep one of them. Well, the one was okay, and the other one was not great. So I sold the one, but I kept the female because I was like, well, maybe she'll come around. And then I bought another one, and he was like, okay. And so now he's being sold. So it's like, I'm like, how does that happen? How do you get like one awesome dog, and then the other ones just like aren't there? But do they pass around their pooping traits?
Like, I didn't need the pooping. I needed the marking.
I needed the, like 3 of them will retrieve like crazy, which is like a fundamental thing you need. And then the other one just like isn't interested at all. Like, okay, where's that come from?
Man, and that's a very interesting subject for me, because primarily I've focused the last few years on the breeding aspect, and I've got guys that are doing a lot of the training with Southern Oak, and obviously have people inside Cornerstone all the time that we're trying to help be better retriever trainers, right? And it's hard. It's hard to sometimes look at a conversation and know when to say, hey, I don't think you're doing necessarily a bad job. I think you have the wrong dog. I think your dog is not cut out to do the work you expect. And I know that stinks to hear, because you bought this puppy thinking you're going to have the next Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan or LeBron James of pups. And maybe the pedigree suggests so. And then you hear stories about, little Bronny, who might play in the NBA with his dad. And you're like, oh, well, that's just how it works. Right. But it's really not always how it works. There's times it just doesn't go that way.
Yeah.
And then there's amazing dogs that came from like a pedigree, and you look at it and you're like, they should maybe just be okay. And they're amazing. How is that possible? Obviously you want to stack the cards in your favor for whatever games you're playing or whatever your plan is, which is, it's amazing to me that you had the insight to get online and figure out, okay, who has the most passes at this? I want one out of that. That's pretty cool. That's going in deep. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. And just for the record, every dog that I've sold, one of them picked up 1,000 snow geese in his first season. Like he's picked up 3,000 birds. Like the dogs that I'm selling aren't, they're phenomenal hunting dogs. It just takes another level that you need to do. To me, it's chasing. Eventually, I want to. Winter qualified for the crown at 2 years old, and I just can't make it happen. But eventually, I want to run the crown. Like that's my goal. Everything I do is about how do I get to the point where I'm ready to really compete at that level. And honestly, there's always going to be things I need to learn, but I think I've learned enough to do it. I just got to get the dogs and everything lined up right. And that's just going to take time. And I just got to keep rebuilding until I find the right. I mean, I had the dog, and, one mistake caused that, lost that.
Man, let's talk about hunting a little bit. You hunt your dogs and you campaign your dogs. We just heard a bad example of what can happen. Can you have a high level grand hunt retriever champion that's going to pass some more grands and also duck hunt with them?
Oh yeah. I mean, Winter, after she passed the grand, she hunted that entire season. My only dog. I hunt probably 60 to 70 days a year. I take off 2 hours of work almost every good weather day, non-sunny days. I know down south, like you guys like sunny days, right? Well,
if we're hunting the woods, we need sun and wind.
You need sun. Okay.
If we're hunting a bad hide, we need sun to hide better.
Okay.
You're obviously going to have ducks working crazy if it's bad weather. I mean, it's good.
Yeah. So we're kind of the end of the Canada migration for Canada geese now, that have to go west around the Great Lakes. So they used to go down to Southern Illinois, like when my dad was a kid. That's where they all went. But after the bunch of these power plants were put in, there's warm water just south of us. And now around us, there's retention ponds everywhere. Yep. Everywhere. And they get loaded. So we'll hold 40 to 50,000 birds just around the outsides of Chicago. And we just smack them, man. I mean, if it's a cloudy day with a little bit of wind, like we just we're all dry fields. So my point to your question was, Winter probably picked up 400 or 500 birds in between her first pass and her second pass, and they got to learn to hunt. I mean, I can run a dog on a blind, a hunt test dog on a blind, pretty much the same way, but teaching them to look for birds and then understand all that just takes time, man. But
what about, so if you have someone who's worried, I hear this from people all the time, and they say, I don't want hunting season to really mess my dog up for hunt tests in the spring. What are a couple action steps they can take to make sure that doesn't happen?
Well, all a dog cares about is the standard is the same. The end. I mean, and to me, there's two simple things that you need to do. The dog needs to have good line manners, which is in our case in a dog hut, in a dog hide. I've a million times had to stand up, walk over, and step on the front paws of the puppy or the dog to get them to put their feet back in the hide.
Yeah.
And then you just go pick up one of those birds. There's your denial, which is the same standard you have for training. And then I just toss that bird, and then they realize that, okay, I had to stay in the hide to get the bird. And if you maintain that standard, you're fine. The other thing is slow whistle sits. Now I know that for those, that don't use an e-collar, I don't exactly know how you do this, because to me an e-collar is kind of essential to fast sits. But anyway, I would love to learn how you guys do that. My point is if you don't get a fast sit, you better give a correction. Sure. And there's so many times that people are so excited because you just dropped 1 million birds and you blow your whistle and your dog kind of like looks around and doesn't give you the good old salute, which is what we want, right? We want them to, you blow that whistle, that dog better sit and look at you and give you, yes, sir, what do you want me to do, sir? And if they don't do that, you apply the same correction that you do when you're doing training. You just don't have a different standard. Now, the only thing I will do differently is I'll put a dog further downwind on a blind, because I probably don't know exactly where that bird is.
Man, what a great point. I could have a whole nother podcast about that.
And the other thing is if you give 2 casts and you're like, man, I thought the bird was there, tweet and start walking. Stop handling. So there's nothing good that's going to happen if you don't know where that bird is. There is no point to handle anymore. Start walking.
God, that's 2 really good points. All right, let's dive into that and then backtrack real quick. So, all right, let's start with the most recent one, the 2 casts. I mean, one of the knocks is, hey, you don't always know where the bird is, right? And so I talked about this a little bit with Bob, a lot with Laura. One of my favorite things about British trials is there's this huge emphasis on putting a dog in a general area on a blind and giving them the, hey, somewhere.
It's somewhere over there, dude.
You're kind of hot. And then the judges are like super intensely focused on what's the dog do now, right? And they want to see that dog just shred the area, not leave the area. If they do leave, it's not so bad. Tweet, stop, come back to the area, hunt there again. We don't have a ton of that in the American system. And what you're saying is if you're hunting and you don't want the dog to become, I'm guessing, just like super loose.
Yeah, if you don't want a dog to hunt at the end of a blind, then you can't let them do that. Like, you got to put them on the bird or realize you don't know where that bird is, and now it turns into an upland hunt.
So
that's what I say.
We that, in my opinion, is coming to like a crossroads where it's like, okay, there is definitely a difference here, because the average duck hunter doesn't want to walk.
Oh yeah, no, I get that. I get that. Like, and this is something that I think doesn't make sense.
That's what I'm looking for you to say, because and that's not a problem. Like, and people make that to be a problem. I don't think it's a problem at all. I just think it's like, hey, in the game of evaluating these dogs in the HRC or wherever, we don't do it this way. Does it make sense or not make sense? Well, how do you have a cookie cutter test where everyone gets the same retrieve and do it that way? You really can't, right?
Yeah. Nothing's perfect.
Right.
A hunt test is not perfect. But what it does do is it judges your level of control.
Yes.
So if you can't have that level of precision to even get into that general area, then there's no point in even running the blind, in my opinion.
That's right.
So, and I hunt a decent amount of water, probably 20% of the hunts that I go on. I hunt a lot of the river that's close to me, and then I go up to the UP quite a bit and hunt teal and stuff. And man, it's the worst, man. But I do it. I paddle out in my kayak. I get into that area wherever I think that bird is, and I stay hunt them up, and I switch into what I'm doing. Because and the other thing, and just because I want to walk through that area and be sure that bird isn't there, and to me that's what it is. And you're right. Like I've often thought, like the best dog to go hunting with is, I mean, I think Kippy even said this on your like I train with a ton of British labs. Half the labs in my training group are British, but now they train them with the whole Rex car system. But I respect that part about the blind running that you guys do, because it makes more sense for hunting. Now, do I think it makes that big of a difference? Not really. Like 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10 birds, I got to walk out and help my dog find that maybe they wouldn't have been able to find anyway because I didn't know exactly where it was. And it is what it is. That is probably the one sacrifice that I make hunting. That's the sacrifice I make hunting that I do because I want a dog that will be really successful in a competitive retriever game.
Yeah. That's the answer I was really looking for when I asked you the question. I mean, that's what I was hoping, where I was hoping we would go with it, because it is important for people to hear, hey, you probably can't have a dog that you just send to a general area and say hunt it up, and then expect that when you get back to hunt test season, you're going to be able to just put them on the bird and they're not going to hunt the end of the blind. That's a very difficult 2 things to ask a dog to do.
Yep. And I run handling drill. The only training I do is I run a handling drill once a week during hunting season. And I typically do it in a bean field or a cornfield, because that's what drill. It's similar to a pattern block. I just, honestly, it's whatever that dog needs. I have 3 kind of go-to pole configurations with 4 poles. The one that I most commonly do is just 4 poles in a line, pretty much the same distance from me, and I'm just working on angle backs and making sure I don't get scalloped casts where they're going for one and I'm casting them off of it, and they better not go back to the one I was just casting. I'll let them go to a one even further over, because that tells me that they're trying to be a good dog. But sure. I run a handling drill every single week during hunting season.
I love that. I do very similar when I travel with my dogs. And sometimes it's as simple as just getting out and doing like walking baseball for 10 minutes, because I just need to make sure you remember, because I saw what you did on that one cast on that one hunt, Yeah.
You didn't give me that one, bro.
Yeah, I saw what happened there. And it does happen in hunting. So the backtracking one more, you talked about sending a dog a little bit downwind of the blind, or the bird in general, whatever that might be. And it's so crazy because, I mean, to your story earlier, 40 honkers come in, you got 5 guys. There is no scenario for that, right? Which ones did the dog mark? I don't know. I mean, I really don't care about the 6 that died in the decoys. What about the 4 that sailed out? That's totally different. You're in a whole different realm, right?
Yeah.
But the dog work can be similar, especially if you're call them to heel. And this is where I think hunt tests get a lot of things right. Call them to heel. Usually I'm walking my dog out to the outskirts of the decoys, past several of the ones that are dead in the decoys, and now we're going to run some blinds, and maybe it's a memory, maybe they saw one fall, but for the most part I'm going to handle it all as a cold blind. Do you think there's something to in my opinion, I feel in a lot of the various hunt test games, you're almost punished for sending your dog downwind of a bird and having them wind it. For duck hunters, that's like the thing,
for sure. Right? But the point is that you're demonstrating control. Like that's what the point is. It's not to completely reenact a hunting scenario. Because if you can put the dog precisely within 5 feet of that bird, you can put him 10 yards downwind.
Yeah, that's a great response to that.
The dog doesn't know any difference. And I'm okay with a dog trusting its nose. Like there's nothing wrong with putting a dog down. I'm talking about in a hunting scenario. To put if you got a big old crosswind, put the dog downwind of it and they'll wind it, because they're taught run until you smell mallard, or you run until you find that area that you're supposed to be in, and then you switch to your nose. So if their nose engages, great. I love dropping 40 honkers. Well, we never shoot 40 honkers, but dropping 7 or 8 honkers in a pile of decoys because I get to work on lining drills.
Yeah,
I
that's
picked that
for sure.
one out. I picked that one out, and if you choose another one, tweet here, run it again, and I get so much training because like you will never. That is that dog is more amped up when they're in a live hunt scenario than it will be at a hunt test.
That's
so
right.
I use it to be like, okay, we're working on lining right now. We're going to run a poison bird. You're going to run right in between these 2 standing up honkers, and I'm going to give you a big back, and you better keep running.
Yep.
So you see that one that's like
drills on hunts,
300 yards out there, and he's walking around. That's the one you get to chase it when you get there. So talk about that. So not only have you just casted this dog off of these 2 close birds, but then they take your cast and they run and they get the ultimate reward. They get a crippled honker that they're chasing that's trying to get away, and they're like, this is the best thing I've ever done. And
best reward I could have ever gotten.
He told me this one was out here.
Yeah.
And it was.
I love that. And I think they do process that way. It's like, oh my gosh, this is the best day of my life. I'm chasing this bird, especially when they catch it and everyone's standing around you cheering like it's a National Geographic episode. And you're like, heck yeah, I'm just glad I got him into the area of that bird. I appreciate
I'm glad
you said,
he looked
though.
up.
Yeah. I mean, the control, if you have the control, that's what is being evaluated in the moment of running a blind in a hunt test, right? And in the marks, you're evaluating, can they hunt in the area? I mean, you're not going to handle them in the area. You're going to let them hunt. Can they hold the area? So I appreciate that perspective. I think it's super important. I think there is a perspective of at some levels, we might be emphasizing control over a dog's natural hunt ability, right? And I think there are some valid points to that. I think you could be doing that. I think there could also be some dogs who are very under control who also have an incredible natural hunt ability, right? I don't think that they are necessarily contradictory. But I think you potentially could have some dogs who have a higher level achievement in hunt tests who don't have a ton of natural hunt ability, if that makes sense.
A hunt test just prepare you to go learn to hunt.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And there, like you said, there's no perfect system. There's no perfect system of evaluation. And for a guy like you and guys like several listeners, I'm sure, like what a fun way to increase the amount of time you spend with your dog and the amount of time you spend outdoors and with your daughter who's going to run a started test, who wants to throw for you, all those things. It's such a cool way to extend even dog training in general. You know, I tell people, hey, even if you're just like, hey, I can't do this, I'm going to send my dog to a professional. All right, cool. Great. I appreciate that. I employ several of them, right? Like that's fine. But your dog's going to come home, and if it sits on the couch and eats Doritos all summer long, it's going to be a wreck this coming fall. So you need to be out doing something with that dog. And like, what an awesome way to increase the amount of time you get, the steps you get every day outside, the time you get in sunlight outdoors, the time you get to experience just being outside, not in front of a screen. Man, it's such a great hobby, such a great thing to add, whether it's hunt test or hunting or training, whatever it is with dogs. It will improve your life, your quality of life. I'm sure of that.
It'll make you poor, but yes.
I don't know. I think you approached it from like, I'm just going to be poor. I'm going to sleep in the van, sleep in the truck. Yeah. Chris Rud down in the van, down by the river, the Hunt Test Hobo. And I think that is a great way to do it. And what I do love about that, my first experience with field trials was with Springer Spaniels. My mentor was Mark Harefield. He imported Springers and Labradors from the UK to the US starting in the late 70s. Similar to your mentor in that he trained a lot of breeds. He has Labrador, Springer, and Cocker AKC field trial champions, or field champions you call them here. So FCs in 3 breeds in the 80s and 90s. And, you know, my first experience with him was going to a Springer field trial and seeing 5 or 6 Ainley Deerskin Jones trailers that were like the one Clark ran into the tree right over here, you know, just unreal. And then I met this guy that was in a minivan, and he had like this really old leather slip lead and 2 springers in his minivan, and he had a tent right behind it. So I guess he's the AKC Springer Field Trial Hobo
There
of
he
days
is.
of old. And this was at the Bird Dog Hall of Fame up in Tennessee, and his dogs were super nice, and you could tell like it was his life. And I remember thinking, dude, this dude's out here with all these guys that have strings of 14 dogs, and this is their living. And he's running the pro because he's got a client dog with him, and he's taking money to train that dog. But he's just out here living, staying in a tent. And I can't remember that guy's name, David maybe, super nice guy. But yeah, he camped behind his minivan, had 2 like PetSmart crates in the back of his van with springers. Like Labradors get the preferential treatment. I'm sure you've learned this, like 1 dog per crate, 1 dog per kennel at a training facility. The airing yard is clean. The kennels are cleaned every day. That's not the case across all breeds. So, pointers, bird dogs, you open up the back of the truck. There's how many are in there, however many I could fit,
6.
Poof, out they come. That I'm not about that life, truthfully. I like a quiet, calm, clean kennel. So what are the plans right now for you? You have Clark's dog. What are you hoping to achieve, coming up this fall and moving into next spring?
Yeah, I'm gonna run some well, I think I'm only gonna be able to run 1 SRS the remaining of the year. I just found out I have to go to Europe and film in Germany and France for 2 weeks, and one of the SRSs I was planning to run is right at that time. So I'll probably try to find one more qual, another SRS, and then the Grand is the ultimate. That's always the goal at the end of the year, is be ready for the Grand. She's probably going to come into heat though, and we're going to breed her. So it probably won't happen. But that's the biggest problem right now, is like my goal with Winter is I want to try to get 12 Grand passes on her. She's at 4 right now, but it's really like, can she stay healthy enough, and can she not come into heat? Like last Grand or 2 Grands ago, her third pass, she came into heat on the 3rd day, or at the 3rd day, but it was after she had already ran the 3rd series. So they just had her run last in the 4th series, which is she couldn't have came in any earlier.
Yeah, that's pushing it right there. Yeah.
Like 2 hours earlier, like if we tested her in the morning, she was fine. She came off the line, and she was actually just happened to be the last dog of that day anyway. But I got home that night, and I was like, oh, no, she's totally coming in. And then I wiped her, and like, yep, there it is.
Dang.
So,
good on them for letting you run last, though.
Yeah, they I mean, they're all. That is one thing about the HRC, and I know the AKC, does a lot of this, but man, they want it. They're so logical with all their rules. You just, I'm very impressed with how well the organization is run, and especially the Grand. I mean, it's a well-oiled machine, man.
Well, the quote we always come back to on the podcast is being fair to the dogs.
Yep, they're super fair. I mean,
we
have a high standard. We have a high standard, but they're fair.
You can't lower that, but you can maintain a very high standard and be fair to the dog. You can say, hey, this dog performed really well for 3 days. We can let it do the 4th series without ruining anyone else's day by just going last. That's logical. Not all realms of the world we live in make decisions that way, unfortunately. No. So how old is Winter now?
She just turned 4.
So eventually you'll have the last litter and be able to spay her, so you can just not worry about the heat cycles. Yeah,
we're going to breed her at least 2 more times. Then maybe a 4th time, I don't know. And then as soon as I can, she's going to get spayed.
Yeah, and then you don't have to worry about all the rigmarole running girls.
It seems like she's a great producer, so I'm going to just keep, and I posted the litter within 24 hours. I had I had 8 puppies sold, so it's hard not to keep breeding her.
Oh yeah. And obviously you want to maintain a high standard in the breeding. And I had a guy call me just this last week, and he's got one of our pups. And you mentioned someone the first of this podcast. Was it Steve? I don't remember which.
Steve Eric.
Yeah, Steve
Jeremy.
Eric. So he trains with Steve. and that group of guys. His name's Blake Allen. And
I know
I'm sure,
Blake.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Blake's a good dude.
Blake saved me one time when I was hoboing, man. I needed to take a shower. And he's like, dude, come into my hotel. You can take a shower here.
Yeah. Dude, I don't know a lot of kinder, more humble people than Blake. And just he's a phenomenal human. He has a pup from us that's the first Grand Hunt Retriever champion from our breedings.
Yeah. I pre-grand trained in Natchez, or on the way to Natchez with Blake.
Yeah.
You should ask him about the time he fell asleep.
I'd love to. Yeah.
I wasn't really a part of it, but I was observing.
He's on my list to have on just because he's like you, straight amateur, just fell in with some good dudes. Obviously, they probably would have said to him, "Hey, you bought the wrong dog. Like from a pedigree perspective,
Rose is a freak."
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story about that. So Rose is out of Cali, who I imported for my guys up in Michigan. And I picked her up at the airport with one of my stud dogs that I bought. And I got her out and I took him. I was in Chicago and I got out of the city, found a place to let them air out. I got her out. And like within 10 minutes, I was like, dang, I probably should have just kept her for myself. Like she was, you're around that dog and you're like, okay, I really just like you. I like all there is. So she had, 3 litters. And the one that Blake has is out of Hank, who's a nice dog. He's really close to the 500 point club in the HRC and a couple master passes and good dog. And it's funny is he's a big dog and Callie was really small and Rose is pretty small.
Yeah, she's small.
Yeah. And then we ended up breeding her to another dog that produced some nice pups. And then we used some frozen semen from one of my favorite field champions I imported named Apache Joe. And we all kept some, and mine ended up tragically passing away. I was out of town. She ate like 6 socks and a ball of aluminum foil. And by the time the vets got to her, it was bad. Super sad deal. Cause I was like, dang, I've waited years to keep something from Apache Joe, and Callie is like my favorite. So I told the guys, I was like, hey, the next Callie litter, I'm keeping something, and she had some complications after breeding and ended up having to be spayed. So we weren't able to have any more Callie pups. And then of course Blake's passing the grand and we're like, dang, Callie pups are the ticket, all the pups we've trained from her. And she was a handful too. And she's the one that stole every chicken my wife had when she would be down here. She would jump over a 5-foot fence, run into my wife's chicken coop area, grab a chicken, hop back over the fence, and I would be sitting there with a whiskey wash hosing Kindles out, and I'd look down and there she was with a chicken in her mouth, like, hey, I found this. Here it is. Here's your prize for the day. So I was in England last year in October at a trial, and I was holding a dog for a guy that I'd just met, holding a bitch, and he was running her son, and I noticed from the sheet that she was a field trial champion. And she was, I think, 6 years old at the time. And I was like, she looks just like Callie, like just like her. And then he ran her an hour later, and she ran. Callie did that deal where she kind of kicked one side out when she ran a little bit and had perfect hips, had excellent hips. But, just kicked a hip out a little bit. And it was, you noticed it. And she ran that way. And he came back and I was like, what's she out of? I had this bitch that I was in love with. Well, it turns out they were litter mates. And I was like, dude, like, here's my story. Anyway, he bred his field trial champion one last time this spring. And that's the puppy I just picked up. I posted her on Instagram. Cool. So yeah, he sold me a bitch pup out of that litter, and I'm fingers crossed, I'm like, please be as nice. But the sister was definitely as nice, if not nicer than Callie. And you see lines like that and you're like, that's what I want. So anyway, Blake Allen, great guy. Awesome dude. Fun story for him. Same sort of deal as you. Like, he got in with some cool folks and just went after it, and has some super high hopes for her. Where I was going with that initially, I mean, he called and was like, hey, I'd love to breed Rose, but I want to make sure you think she's good enough. And I was like, What do you mean, bro? You mean you're the only Grand Hunt Retriever champion our kennel has produced, who's passed all of her health tests with flying colors? Yeah, dude. Like who has an amazing pedigree, and he's such a humble guy. He was like, "Oh man, if you don't think it's smart, I won't do it." And I was like, "Dude, yes, please. That's a dog that needs to have some pups, and hopefully we'll see where it goes." But I'd love to put some of those in the hands of guys like you or Clark, or see what they can do with them. See if there's a potential there for replicating that sort of success in a totally different game than what the pedigree suggests they should be good at.
Yeah. No, I mean, like I said, 2 of the dogs that I train with every day, well, not every day, but at least twice a week, they're bred out. I don't know which lines they are, but one just passed the Grand, and then the other one went out in the 4th series. So they can do it, man.
Yeah. I think it's there. I think it comes down to some of the compulsion training, how you handle that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I know we'll get into in the Hunt Test Guide very thoroughly. And you've got this pedigree, like I mentioned in several podcasts, that for well over a century has not had a lot of compulsion.
Mm-hmm.
They've had plenty of correction. That's a misnomer. People think, oh, it's all positive. No, dude, it's not positive. I promise you that. But they haven't had compulsion. And so how are they going to handle it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Compared to generations of, hey, everything in this pedigree had compulsion and was successful. That's a huge difference.
And I'm glad. Were you the one that kind of like said compulsion, or did you hear that from somebody? Because when I texted you and we were prepping for this podcast, I was like, that's the first time I've ever heard it explained that way. And I think that's the best way to say it. Because it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, was that you or?
Yeah, no, that's me. And that's me trying to get away from using clickbait words.
The bad word.
Yeah.
The other F word.
And I don't do it, right? So it's not my style of training. I'm also not anti, but I don't want to be the guy that I was very turned off by some guys who have preceded me in this industry who just used bad words to try to discredit a method of training. And I was over here like, look, I don't necessarily disagree, but do you realize all the success you're dismissing by just saying it that way? Right. And so, yeah, for me, compulsion and helping people. This is why in Cornerstone, we have this module called How Your Dog Learns. And we go through learning theory. We go through positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment. You really need to understand those things. You need to understand what you're communicating to the dog. And we have this human way of understanding. So we would say all punishment is bad. Like negative punishment is not bad, right? It's not what you think it is. And we would say, well, reinforcement's good. Well, negative reinforcement is not necessarily good. Like it's not what we think. So helping people understand that is important to me, and using words like compulsion, I think it just clarifies what we mean.
It's a good word.
Yeah. I think force is fine, but it's become
been branded. It's become
the wrong thing. Bad word, right? Yeah. And e-collar has become a bad word. I mean, people have, they have associations with those words, and it becomes highly dramatic on podcasts and on social media.
Mm-hmm.
But what I have found, like with you, definitely with Clark, like if you talk to Clark and you have an honest conversation and say, what did we think about each other 5 years ago? We both would have been very dismissive, right? Yep. What you come to realize is we actually agree on so much more than we disagree on. The slice of what we don't do the same in the pie is really small. And I can hear his perspective or yours or Bob's or Kippy's and say, well, yeah, I don't think that's wrong at all. Not the way I would necessarily want to do it right now with my dogs, but like, you're not doing anything wrong. And again, it all comes down to me to like, are you being fair to the dog?
Yeah. Are you being consistent? Which inevitably means fair.
Yeah.
Which I think is the biggest thing amateurs don't. It's not even that they don't understand. They don't have the muscle memory built in yet to be good at being consistent. And if anything, I'd tell to somebody that's an amateur, you practicing being consistent, whether it's casting, practicing healing with your dog, any of those things, whether you're training for hunt test or not, like being good at the muscle memory part of it is really important. I'll never forget, like Dan, when he was teaching me how to force fetch, I practiced with an invisible dog. Like he showed me how to do it with an invisible dog before I ever did it with a dog, because he knew, because he's trained hundreds and hundreds of people on how to do this, because he trains all of his clients on how to do everything that they teach. That's very different with their program. That is really, really helpful for me is after the first month, you go down there every week or every other week, and he teaches you for the next 3 months of training what he's doing, every part of it. And so he's a fantastic teacher because he's taught so many people. So he realized really quickly, you can't have them start trying to force fetch a dog when they've never even practiced. So he would show me all that stuff, and I would practice my ghost dog. And then when I had to do it with the real dog, I still screwed it up, but I could fix it faster.
Sure. Yes. And what you just said, that is one of the most important things to me. Like I've said it a few times, but when we started Cornerstone, there was this conversation of like, what all are we going to teach? And the compulsion aspect of it, in my opinion, was something that really needs to be taught in person.
Yeah.
Someone has to show you the timing. I still have that opinion. And I appreciate Bob's course on it. I think you can go into high level detail on it in a video, but learning that timing is really, really tough. Like it's not something that's going to come intuitively like that. And the question becomes, well, what about the dog that you screw the timing up with? Right. And so for me, if you don't have someone standing right there with you saying, don't correct there. Hey, too much pressure. Hey, you didn't release the pressure at the right point there. You're confusing the animal. It becomes very dangerous. And I've seen a lot of these people get into dog training through Cornerstone, and they learn their way, but they made a lot of mistakes on the way. And obviously, Chris, you're a natural with dogs. You could not be 5-6 years in and accomplished what you've accomplished if you didn't have a knack for communicating with animals, right? But you said you like teaching. You feel gifted to teach. You've got experience in pastoral ministry where you communicate and you have to communicate clearly. So like you've been given a path to do that. Some people haven't, and they get into dogs, and it takes years, and they may have one dog until that dog is 8 or 9 and then get a second dog. And so 16 years down the road, they've had as many training sessions as you might have in 6 months.
Yeah.
Right. And so it just takes so much nuance and time to get to that level of I can do compulsion right and be fair to the dog. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I won't talk about compulsion, but like I love online courses. Like, I mean, I have one now. I've learned a lot from online courses, but what I would encourage anybody to do is like if you're going to work with another pro, which I think everybody should have a coach. I used to have to drive 2 hours every weekend to have time with my coach. I would show them what you're working on and ask them and have them look at the videos that you're working on, because they'll see little things that, you don't see because you're in your own head and you can't see what your back is doing or whatever. I'm just making that up. But I think that you can do a lot. I mean, I learned a ton from YouTube videos. I feel like I kind of lost what I was really trying to say there, but it was something along the lines of, I think you can learn 90% of what you need to learn with all the courses that are out there and what's going to be on the Hunt Test guide and what we're building. But you still need to have a group of people that are looking at what you're doing. And that's why I love training with new people. It's one of my favorite things to do. Like if I can just get in if I could, I just get in a camper and I just travel across the country with my family, going to pro and being like, can we train together? Because
the Hunt Test Hobo Hoedowns, man. Dude, man, I love that.
That would be my dream.
I love that. I think it'd be awesome, and I think it'd be super valuable, and I appreciate that because, again, it's not people create a false dichotomy there. Oh, you can't learn from online. You got to get in a retriever group. And I'm like, well, it's not an either or. It's definitely a both and. You can for sure learn so much from online, but you want to really help get your timing down. You want to really have someone, and we've done it through creating groups online where you can post videos and whatnot. But
videos
in-person training with people, and that's something we've really strive to do with Cornerstone, and we will do with the Hunt Test Guide too, is create groups around the country where you're like, hey, look, get together with some like-minded guys and some guys who've been doing this 10 times longer than you, and help each other out.
And I'll tell you what, most of the retriever clubs are, that I've visited or trained with, I promise you, they have not watched any online courses because their understanding and their knowledge of dog training is not where it should be. That if they would have just understood the head knowledge and not listened to what one guy told them 25 years ago, they would be way farther than they are right now.
That's been the experience. And I don't want to turn it super negative, but that was the experience I had early on. Went to a group training and saw someone absolutely whiplashing a dog with about 4 foot of water hose. And then saw someone put 2 collars on a dog because 1 collar wasn't sufficient enough. Yeah. And I'm watching that and thinking that I just don't think this is the way, and the whole group was into it. Now, since then, I've been to some much better groups and seen totally different. Like, for instance, when Steve Eric and his group came down to pre-grand train, you're like, holy cow, these guys know what they're doing. Like everything is kosher. Everything's fair, even correcting the dogs. We could have people here that are anti all the things, and they'd be like, well, that's pretty fair. You could explain it to him, but
that dog knew he was going to get it.
yeah. When he got it, he knew what he was getting it for. Right.
Yes.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
But, I think there's a lot of value in both. Right. Yeah. I think you can do an online course. You can learn a lot. It's still a thing, a living thing you're trying to communicate with. You need to work on your timing. You need some real life experience. Probably need to video yourself. That's always helpful to me. I watch videos still and I'm like, oh gosh, like I was not consistent right there.
Yeah. Right? I've been too consistent with my eating as every time I film myself now.
I love that. Yeah, that's good. All that's super helpful. I'm super excited about your course in the Hunt Test Guide because I do think there's so many people who are amateur trainers who want to go a little deeper into it, who want to extend want to dive in all the way. They want to run tests. So I think the pathway to doing that has been laid out very clearly in your course. And I think the stuff we're about to continue to release from Clark, from Lyle, from other sources and resources is going to be super valuable. It's fun for me. I love it. Love seeing people learn.
Yep. That's what it's all about.
Tell people how they can find you on social and how they can find your course. I'll let you share that and how they can get involved in doing what you're doing.
Yeah. My primary social channel is still Facebook. It's just Chris Rud, and you'll see a picture of, I think, Winter and my kids on my profile picture as of right now and holding some grand ribbons. And then the Hunt Test Hobo on Instagram is my main Instagram now. And I'm basically just posting stuff for the new podcast that I launched three weeks ago, trying to, I love podcasts. I like when you're driving around, there's not enough of them in my opinion. We need one for every day of the week right now. And I think there's, maybe 3 or 4 decent podcasts that are specifically around the game, the competitive side. So I felt like, hey, I love learning. I can interview people, and hopefully people can learn things along the way. So that's where the Hunt Test Hobo kind of came about. And so those are the kind of the 2 primary social channels. And then my course is the Amateur's Guide to Hunt Test Success, which is on the Hunt Test Guide. We launched it, I think is at the beginning of this month. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback from people, which was encouraging for me because, I really struggled with what do I put in this course? Because I didn't want to put here's how you do a cheating single, or here's how you run pattern blinds, because I feel like there's pros around there that have, can do a great job with that and probably do a better job. I mean, they've ran thousands of dogs through these types of drills, but they haven't had to do it alone. So the first half of my course is really about how to train and how to train alone and tips and tricks to that. And a lot of it is about the standard of marking, because I think the biggest failure that people have when they get to the upper level hunt test game is their dogs don't know how to mark right. And there's kind of two reasons that I go through in the course. You see a lot of gut hunts at weekend tests or the grand, and then you're like, why didn't my dog pass? Well, they weren't disciplined in their marking. They didn't truly know how to understand, like, hey, you're marking with your eyes first, and you proceed directly to an area first with your eyes, and then you switch into hunt mode. But when you don't have a bird boy, you're a lot of times you're setting up a one winger for each mark, and you're letting that mark go. And then what happens when your dog can't find it? You're going to let them hunt, hopefully, or recall them. But they're not successful. And if they are successful, they first were gut hunted the whole field until they found it. Like that's a pattern behavior that we don't want. So I go through a lot in the course and how I train alone to make sure that, I'm keeping that 90% success rate, that they proceed directly to the bird and they find the bird. And I think a lot of it is just an example of how to do that and how to guarantee your dog has success in marking. So that's really what the first, half of the course is. And then I go through a lot of drills that, I like to do that are in quarter acre lot type of mode. I mean, I live on a corner house. I don't even have a backyard. So I've had to figure out, how do I progress, dogs. So I have 4 drills in there about that. And then the next part, is about how to get to the bucket right. Because amateurs suck at that. I mean,
line manners, man. Yeah.
So I go through a bunch of things that, Dan has taught me that I think amateurs just don't know and don't practice enough, which that was the first person that bought the course. They texted me 2 weeks after and they said, hey, I just put a season title on my dog. And he's like, I wouldn't have been able to do it without your course because of the double winger walk-ups that you do. And he's like, that helped my dog so much leading up to that, to understand, how to respect that whole walking process to the bucket and how to make it reward based and not just beating them with the water hose, which is the old school mode. Is
that's the old school way.
You do that dog ain't healing, just smack them in the ribs with the thing. I'm like, what the heck? How do they can possibly compute that means stay with you? Like, come on.
Yeah.
They don't. And so I go through that whole process and a bunch of other ways about how to have a steady dog and how to do that. And then the last part, which I think I don't know, is like the hidden gem of it or something. I don't know. The biggest failure I see at the Grand is dogs don't understand. They don't understand marking concepts, and they don't know how to react when you have this complex marking scenario. And they don't have disciplined marking where they're like, I'm pointing you there. You need to trust me that the bird is there. And that doesn't necessarily come from wagon wheel. That comes from throwing all these really challenging field trial concepts, but throwing them at hunt test distance and going through that. And I have the whole process that I go through that I think is really valuable because it teaches marking concepts and isn't just testing them. And I go through this whole process and I have a big flow chart that I go through in the course. And I think that is something that no matter what level your dog is, you might be doing all this stuff, but it's a great way to process through it or to work through it and not just, I threw those concepts and I think the dog knows. Like if you go through the way that I try to teach it, like by the time you're done, because you've taught it, tested, tested, your dog knows it. Now that doesn't mean they're gonna screw it up. They're probably still gonna screw it up at some point in their life because they're dogs. But you've taught it and you can be confident. And honestly, I think that's the part that led to 52 of 52 weekend passes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I knew they were well prepared.
So let me ask you one final question. There's so many things we could talk about, but we're
at 2 hours, dude. I
used to keep these at 1 hour. We're at 2. I got to be done. I saw my son pull up all the go from wakeboarding, and I know he's eager to tell me how it went.
And if you're still listening,
yeah,
sorry.
no, yeah, thank you for sticking with us. It means that you're also in the weeds.
Yes.
But no, I look, all this is fantastic. I would love if we could do this again and earmark the conversation on whistle stops, because to me, Laura Hill said it best on my podcast. I said whistle stops, and she stopped me and she said whistle starts.
Yeah, I heard
And
that.
it was like that's the and she doesn't use a collar or a prong collar or anything like that. So for her, it's very much a like, hey, turn around, like, hey, we're doing the next new thing, like, and you get that salute thing. And I remember the first time I saw that in a dog that had never been punished with any sort of, it was a lady who's very, very positive reinforcement trainer in the UK, who's like clicker and treat all the way. And she had a golden, and she blew the whistle at the English championship and some really tall cover. And that dog stopped, spun up a bunch of dirt, and stood up on its hind legs out of the cover. Like, what's up,
meerkat?
boss? Yeah. And I was like, whoa, I didn't expect. It was a golden too. So I was like, dadgum, I'm 0 for 2 on guessing what would have happened here. I want to hear one last thing from you.
Okay.
What you just explained about your course on the Hunt Test Guide, I think is amazing. I think that's a great explanation of it. I think if you're out there and you want to, if you're out there listening and you're not a pro trainer and you want to run Hunt Tests, I mean, highly, highly recommend you check out the Hunt Test Guide and Chris's course and all the things that we're going to do. And all these guys have a great answer to this question, but I want you guys to hear Chris's. You've had great success. You went 52 for 52. You had your first failure for a very legitimate, purposeful, and intent, based reason for doing that. Why share it?
Why share the knowledge?
Yeah, the method. Like, you did it. You've got a record that you set, which is cool.
Yeah.
You've had some great success. Why share it?
Well, honestly, it's because I stand in a holding blind and I watch people struggle because of a lack of knowledge. Because I believe if they knew it, they would change most of it. Some of it's human. It's really, I think I have more respect for a dog that has better line manners, that wants to go get a bird, than I do that any dog that crushes out on the field and is a psycho on the line. Because that owner understands that's where ultimately it's gonna. I have a friend that has a dog that has close to 1,000 points in HRC and he can't run anymore because it never was addressed. Like, and the dog's like 5 or 6. It's over. Like, there's a certain point where they know this is a test and they know when you're training. If you don't maintain that standard, it's over. So I like training, man. When I put my first Grand Pass on winter, I didn't have anybody I was training with. I would go on the weekends and train with Dan, but there was nobody around me. And nobody that I knew, because I didn't know anybody. And luckily I've gotten to connect with more people, and I have a fantastic training group. Like, it's 5 of us. And we have the best group chat and text message, but man, we're so for each other. Like, 2 of them showed up to the last SRS just to watch 2 of us run and just hang out because we're a team, man. So I love helping them and teaching them. And I've just seen so many things that pros just don't think about anymore because they're not there anymore. I mean, they've been doing it for 6, 7, 8, 20 years. They haven't had to teach, like, say, drag back, because the dogs teach it over time when you're running 20 dogs. But when you got one dog, that doesn't happen.
God, what a great example.
So you gotta develop things, and I have a video on drag back, and you got to create that. You got to do a lot of things that pros don't do, because you have to create the scenarios that are like a hunt test.
Yeah. Whereas they wake up every morning and it's like a hunt test.
Yeah. I mean, they still should do it. And
sure.
And most do, that's why they get together with other pros. So it feels like a test, but they don't have to do it nearly as much as the one dog
the
or
guy
2
that's
dog
got
guy.
1, 2 dogs. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I really appreciate your willingness to help other people and share and teach in a way that, in my opinion, exhibits a massive amount of knowledge and humility. I think that's it's key. So I think it's going to help a lot of people. I'm super excited.
Yeah.
All this stuff that Hunt Test Guy's doing makes me really excited for the future of the sport, truthfully. So
yeah,
it's fun for me to watch.
Well, I'll put a selfish plug. Everybody go to the Hunt Test Hobo in Spotify or Apple and follow or subscribe or whatever. I can't remember what you do in Spotify, but I'd love for you guys to learn more. So
yeah, Hunt Test Hobo, and then check out the Hunt Test Guide. Chris's course is available in the store. You can join the Hunt Test Guide and see, setups, multiple setups per week from Clark and Lyle, explanations of the setups. We've got Clark's course on there for pattern blinds, for 4-phase, following the gun on the bucket. I think he's got e-collar intro on that course as well. And then I know they just filmed a course. I'm not going to say what all's in it. I'll say it on the podcast, but they've got a good course with Lyle coming out. We have some really cool stuff coming out on there. So I'm excited. You guys be sure to check it out. Thank you so much for sticking with us for 2 hours and 10-ish minutes, however long. I've enjoyed the conversation. I didn't know we had so much in common as far as our background. That was super fun to hear at the beginning, and I'm looking forward to the next time we get to talk. Chris, thanks for being on.
Thank you. It's fun.